Okay guys, I'm back. I've done a little bit more work on the shifter. I have not been able to finally install it to test fit it on the actual Camaro T-5 in the Blazer. I think I mentioned that I wasn't happy with the way my transmission mount. Once we tightened everything down on the transmission mount, it pulled the tail shaft of the transmission where it wasn't true dead center. Well, because of that, the little shifter box is setting too far to the passenger side to fully install the shifter. So until I get under there and do some changes to the tab on the cross member, I won't be able to test fit it. But what I did, just kind of a supplemental video from last night's video about can you put a Mustang T-5 shifter on a GM T-5 transmission. Now, unless I have some oddball shifter that maybe this isn't true, don't listen, and like I said, I want to preface this statement. Unless I have some kind of weird Hurst T5 shifter that's unique, all those things on the internet where people are saying, oh, your back two bolts are the same, all you have to do is add those two front bolts and it'll bolt on. I'm here to tell you right now, that's BS. Those holes don't even come close to lining up. And if you tried to elongate those original rear holes, or like just made them big enough to where you might be able to get the bolts in, you wouldn't even be centered. Now what I mean by centered is when you look at the bolt pattern, you've got, see if you guys can see me, you got your original rear hole, your original front hole for the Mustang rectangle mount. But if you look over here on this side, just inside, and I am going to pick this up in a minute so you can see, just inside of the original rear hole, forward and outside, is where the new hole would be to run it on the GM T5. Then because, like they say on the internet, the Mustangs use a rectangle, GM uses a square. Well, it's not even a full square, but it's less rectangular than the Ford. So then your second hole is here. And yes, I'm either going to have to grind and fit a washer to take up this little lip, or I can come in with a burr and just flatten that out so the head of the bolt will sit flat. But I'm waiting to do that until after I get done with my test fit. But what I wanted to show you was I was able to take apart, see if you guys can see this, I was able to take apart just a GM T5 shifter that has the pattern to match the shifter box. So I was able to very slowly match this thing up, because basically I had this disassembled, flipped upside down, and then I was using this as my template. Well, what happens is if you use the factory rear holes, the center of your, like where your mechanism, where this mechanism comes through the shifter, isn't going to be centered. If you use those original back holes and just made them big enough, which I don't even think you could do, and I will show you when I take it out of the vise, it wouldn't even be centered. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that'll fit, but you've got to have this centered over your mechanism, and you can see, maybe you can't because of the video, but that's not, you know what I mean, you're not kosher there. Those back holes are not lining up to center your pattern over where it has to mesh or coincide with the innards of your transmission. So I didn't have all the tools that I really wanted. I didn't have a 3/8, and actually it's smaller than 3/8. I'm gonna say it's like 11 5/16, something smaller than 3/8. I didn't have the proper center punch. Plus, it gave me more fits than it should have, trying to measure both the center of this, finding the true center of this piece. You can kind of see on there where I was marking on it last night. But finding the absolute true center of this, plus, if you look underneath here, finding the true center of the where the mechanism comes through the plate. Now with that thing setting like it is there, see if I can get this thing to sit on here without falling on the floor. Anything can happen. Okay, so if you look at that plate, you can see where the two new holes. Let me get my pointer so I can get my big fat hand out of the video. But in order to get the pattern centered over this device so that it'll engage into the transmission properly, basically I just had to use this as my pattern and center it over that and get the holes drilled. I can't hold it 100% here, I'm looking through the video, but you get the drift, how it's not a simple add two holes, bolt the thing on and run it. You know, I don't know where that rumor started and why there's multiple threads on the internet saying that, oh yeah, all I had to do was bolt it on in the back, measure for my front holes and bolt it on. That wouldn't even work. Like, I'm truly at a loss how that ever got started. So basically what I did, like I said, was add these holes, which are super hard to drill without a drill press, because when you, even though when this hole intercedes this hole at all, it tries to walk your drill bit towards the open space. Yeah, that was a good time, but I did get it done. Then I got my two new front holes for the GM mounting pattern. And then some of you keen observers will see that this has like a lip all the way around, like a recessed lip. So whenever you put this on, you need to use a decent quality gasket maker. I have some right stuff. I'm leery about using it because it absolutely is super strong. I know it wouldn't leak, but if I ever need to take this off to do some work on it, it is a chore to fight off something that's been sealed on with right stuff. I'm also looking at some of that ultra gray that kind of turned it, when it cures, it almost like makes like a plastic. I just don't know for sure what I'm going to use, but I want to make sure I can get back in it without a whole bunch of trouble. But basically you're going to have to run a bead on your shifter box all the way around where you're sealing, so you know you get a good seal to keep the water and debris and junk out of your transmission. Now something I wanted to show you guys. Oh wow, it did sit there. I was afraid it was going to fall off. But if you would go back and watch the video where I showed the exploded or disassembled shifter, you basically have your aluminum base plate, and there's my little hearse symbol, which I'm still leaning towards this being a factory Mustang SVO shifter. I'm not 100% sure, but in that video last night I didn't show the positive stop, the plate for the positive stops. But you've got the aluminum lower, you've got your shifter, I'm just going to call it a pivot T. It's like the T, it's got the T in it and the pivot ball. Now it sits down into this housing. I did not find any information on what I'm supposed to put in there. I don't know if that's lubricated or not lubricated, self-lubricated. Does it get lubricated from the transmission fluid? So I just went ahead and used some of that real tacky red high temp bearing grease and just kind of shoved it down in the wells where those two little tiny springs, because you got your aluminum case, you drop in your pivot ball T, and then you put in your little hardened, I'm going to call them like discs, The discs sit down in the well on top of your T. That gives it a surface to for the spring to push on. Then you will drop in your dual spring assemblies. Then you put on your positive stop plate. Then you put on your Torx bolts with your, I was calling them straps last night, where the straps, when you tighten these bolts, these 4 Torx head bolts, you're basically compressing that small dual spring assembly down on your disc, and of course you're securing your stop plate. Then all you have to do after that is bolt on your shifter handle. Now if you'll look and see, I have replaced the retardedly long bolts that they had in this shifter when I purchased it with some grade 8 fasteners. I put a washer and a lock washer on it. 2 reasons. I wanted to make sure that I didn't gall into this piece. Plus, it literally makes the end of the bolt perfectly flush. When that thing's tight as you can get it, you got it perfectly flush. I put 1 small drop of blue Loctite on the threads, and I've got a lock washer, because I did read some reports on the interweb that for some reason the bolts in these shifters tend to come loose from engine I'm assuming it's from vibration from the engine or hard shifting. I don't know what they're doing, but I decided to double up on my safety on this one. These 4 Torx head screws or bolts, whatever you want to call them, I put a very small amount of Loctite on them, blue Loctite, because if you ever try to get something loose with red Loctite where you don't want to put heat on it, that can be a pull the thread situation. And since these do thread into aluminum, I didn't want to get too aggressive and end up tearing up the threads in there. So basically this is the finished shifter. See if you guys see the end of it here. Factory, I'm assuming that's a factory 5-speed shifter handle, because that's what mine looked like on my 83 GT I had years ago. But it's ready to be installed, provided all my measurements were 100% and everything jives with that pivot ball intersecting with the cup. I do have another, I think they call these nylon or fiber bushing cups. There's one already in my, sorry, I'm way out of screen there. But there is one of these already in my transmission. I might pull it out and just compare it to this one, and whichever one's in the best shape, I'll run it. I did see online where they were recommending that you put a little dab of grease inside this cup before final assembly. I don't think it would really hurt anything, so I'll probably do that. But I have it assembled, ready to be installed. If and when I get under there and get the stupid transmission recentered in the tunnel and recentered in the vehicle. So there it is in all of its glory. I did paint it last night with some, I think it was semi-gloss Krylon fast drying paint. Well, when it's 20 degrees outside, paint don't want to dry. So note to self, if you take that piece, and my home, don't tell everybody in the world, I don't want to get in trouble. My home oven will go down to 170 degrees. So I basically threw that bad boy in the oven for an hour, and then just left it in there after I turned the oven off. Hour and a half, 2 hours total, something like that. Came back home and it was completely dry. So anyway, if you paint when it's too cold, you can't get it to cure, and your wife won't kill you. Throw it in the oven on 170 and it dries her up pretty fast. So anyway, I appreciate you guys watching. I wanted you guys to get a little bit more information as I go through this process of trying to fit this crazy Mustang. It's a Hurst Mustang T-5 shifter to my Camaro T-5 trans. Anyway, keep watching. I'll keep posting videos.